Welcome back, students. Time for another informative tutorial on the topic of heart attack. You see, I'm Menopause Taylor, and I'm bringing you the state of menopause in the world today, and I cover everything. Heart attack is a great big topic, and this is the first of many of your options for preventing a heart attack, because I teach you everything about the diseases that are associated with menopause, but I also teach you about every option for preventing them. And so we're starting with the first of your dietary options. I'm going to be giving you 3 podcasts on this. And you need to watch all videos, listen to all podcasts, read my book, watch webinars, anything you do in my educational series, do it in order, because I'm very, very careful about the order. There is nothing willy-nilly about the order. And if you jump around, I don't have any idea what kind of education you'll get. So each subsequent step gives you the next piece of information that you need to be successful. If you have my book, all of chapter 28 is on heart attack, and this material from today is under the section of diet as a management option for preventing a heart attack. Now, when it comes to the risk factors for a heart attack, there are some that have absolutely absolutely to do with your dietary intake and dietary options. And so the dietary options for preventing a heart attack have to do with the risk factors that cause a heart attack in the category of diet, which include high lousy LDL, low healthy HDL, total cholesterol to HDL ratio greater than 4, and high triglycerides. That's what I'm going to talk about today. You see, I have a problem with the way most people deliver information on dietary options for preventing a heart attack. They tend to be really general, and they just lump a bunch of things together. For instance, if I asked you what kind of diet you need to adopt to prevent a heart attack, I bet you would pipe off with low-fat, high-fiber. And you'd be correct, but what does that mean exactly? How exactly do you go about achieving it? You see, most educators tell you a little bit and then leave you to your own devices to accomplish the intended goal. And then most people fail because they don't know how to accomplish the goal. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to break everything down for you into its component parts so that you have specific dietary principles on how to prevent a heart attack. Okay? So today I'm going to discuss low fat. The next podcast will discuss low fiber, and the next podcast will discuss low sugar. And for each one, I'll be very, very specific, and I'll even show you how to use information on nutrition labels. Even if you're the low-fat queen, you should definitely listen to this podcast. And if you ever focus on low-fat foods of any kind, you are precisely the person who needs to listen to this podcast. So let's talk about fats. We have targeted fats as the cause of heart attacks, but you have learned that they are not the only culprit. But somehow the link between the two has stuck. And as with most of the information you get these days, fats are only part of the problem. And only certain fats pose any problem at all. So that's the key right there. The key is to understand that fat is the sum of 3 different kinds of fat. There's saturated fat, there's trans fat, and there's unsaturated fat. The first 2 are bad for you, the last one is good for you. And that's the big key to preventing a heart attack. It's all about limiting or avoiding the bad fats and eating a whole lot of the good fats. So you should limit your intake of saturated and trans fat. And what you need to know in order to accomplish that is which foods contain each kind of fat. You know, this is actually quite simple, but it's just not what most people want to hear. Saturated fats are animal fats, period. All meat and dairy products contain saturated fat. So the easy way to limit or omit saturated fat is to limit or omit meat and dairy. It's simple. If it has a face or a mother, then it's full of saturated fat. And saturated fat is what causes heart attacks. typically you'll find recommendations for the upper limit of saturated fat intake. And now that's all fine and good. But the truth is that the closer to zero saturated fat you get, the better. And you'll see recommendations to limit your saturated fat to less than 75 kilocalories per day, or to eat fewer than 20 grams per day. Now, anytime you see parameters like that, just understand that they are geared for what most people will do. They're not necessarily geared for what's best. They're not geared for the specific purpose of preventing a heart attack, and they certainly aren't geared specifically for you. So like it or not, the bottom line is this: the more you limit your saturated fat, the lower your risk for a heart attack. Next is trans fat. Now, one of the big problems for people who are trying to lower their risk of heart attack is that everybody talks about saturated fat instead of talking about trans fat. But trans fat are more responsible for causing heart attacks than saturated fats. Trans fats are solid fats, and it doesn't take much trans fat to put you in the high-risk category for a heart attack. If you eat just 2 grams of trans fat per day, you'll be right smack dab in heart attack land. So this indication on a nutrition label is critical. But there are layers and layers of problems with that line item on a nutrition label. I've explained before that the FDA allows the food industry to list 0 grams of trans fat when the food actually contains 0.5 grams of trans fat. So the food industry just decreases the serving size so that they can write 0 grams of trans fat on the nutrition label. And the recommended amount of trans fat in your diet is 0. So here you have a situation in which even if the nutrition label says that there are 0 grams of trans fat, there may actually be 0.5 grams per serving. So 2 grams of trans fat per day is considered excessive enough to cause an eventual heart attack. But the food industry is allowed to lie about the grams of trans fat and write 0 grams of trans fat when there may be as much as 0.5 grams of trans fat. In other words, even if you're trying to avoid trans fat entirely, you could easily consume well over 2 grams by using a product that says it contains 0 grams of trans fat. So here's the solution. Instead of looking at the nutrition label for trans fat, look at the ingredients. And all of the following are trans fat. If you see any one of them, do not buy the product. All hydrogenated vegetable oils, those are the worst. All partially hydrogenated vegetable oils. All shortenings. Palm oil, palm kernel oil, and coconut oil. Fried foods, baked foods, margarine, vegetable shortenings, and junky snacks all contain trans fats. So the key message in terms of preventing a heart attack with regard to fat is avoid both saturated fats and trans fats. Now that doesn't mean you can't have any fat, because there are a bunch of good fats. All unsaturated fat is good fat. And the simple way to stick to the unsaturated fats is to stick with plants. Plants have only unsaturated fat, and there are 2 types of unsaturated fat: monounsaturated and polyunsaturated. And you don't have to worry about which is which, because they're both good for you. Nuts, avocados, olives all contain unsaturated fat. And if you want to use vegetable oils, the ones that consist of unsaturated fat are olive oil, soybean oil, flaxseed oil, corn oil, canola oil, peanut oil, safflower oil, and sunflower oil. If you're eating plant products, you know you're eating only unsaturated fat. It's that easy. Do you see why saying that you should just eat a low-fat diet is inadequate? Most people hear that and then they proceed to eat low-fat dairy products. That's like being an alcoholic who claims to have kicked the habit but still consumes beer every day. Dairy products come from animals. They're chock full of saturated fat. The term low-fat dairy product is an oxymoron. Okay, there's one other kind of fat, cholesterol. You learn that your body makes most of your cholesterol. So the cholesterol you consume in your diet is nowhere near as important as the saturated and trans fat for preventing a heart attack. Unfortunately, you hear more about avoiding cholesterol than you do about avoiding saturated and trans fats. But the truth is that cholesterol is much less harmful than these two other kinds of fat. When it comes to nutrition labels, you should not eat more than 300 milligrams of cholesterol in an entire day. Foods that contain cholesterol include animal products. All meat and all dairy products are high in cholesterol. You see, just as your body makes cholesterol, so do the bodies of all the other animals. So you don't need their cholesterol. Your body already makes enough. And cholesterol does not exist in the world of plants. So once again, if you stick to a 100% plant-based diet, you avoid cholesterol as well as all the bad fats. You see, people tend to make this issue of the relationship between fats and heart attacks more complicated than it is. In reality, they distort the issue altogether, and that's because it's really not about fats causing heart attacks at all. It's about animal products causing heart attacks. But people don't want to hear that. They love their meat and dairy. Now, in a previous podcast, I talked about something called transit time. Transit time is the time it takes food to get from your mouth to your toilet. And when it comes to determining which foods cause a heart attack, it's all about transit time. Foods that have a long transit time and take a long time to travel through your body cause heart attacks. Foods that have a short transit time and speed their way through your body do not cause heart attacks. And like it or not, all animal foods have a very slow transit time of about 5 days. 5 days to work their way through your 25 feet or 7.5 meters of intestines. And as they slug their way through, they release all those bad, saturated, and trans fats into your bloodstream. And these are the fats that go to your arteries and bury into your arterial walls. And there they form roadblocks to block your arteries. Conversely, plant foods fly through your intestines in less than a day. They contain none of the bad fats, only the good fats. And the good fats are too big and fluffy to bury into your arterial wall. They cause none of the damage that bad fats cause. Now, every time I discuss this topic, someone pipes up and says, what about fish? Fish is good for you. They contain good fats. So let's address fish. Fish do contain some good fatty acids. And these fatty acids do have some beneficial effects on your heart. They can reduce your total cholesterol and triglycerides levels. But it's the fish oils that are good, not the fish flesh. So the big question you have to answer is whether or not the beneficial effects of the fish oils is worth the detrimental effects of the fish flesh. Oh, and let's not forget about the mercury content of fish, which you can't quantitate. The thing that nobody mentions is that oceans are the cesspools of humanity, and fish live in the ocean. So fish are possibly the most contaminated animals of all. You see, I always tell you that everything has both advantages and disadvantages. Fish are no different. You have to balance the benefits of fish against the risks of fish. And finally, let's talk about soy.